and I think this cycle takes us to 200 or 300K, then you're going to see Bitcoin going to 1 million or 2 million. I mean, it's hyper Bitcoinization, really. It's going to 10x and then it's going to 10x again. So, I mean, from an investing point of view, you don't want to miss something that's going to go up 100x and maybe 1,000x if you talk 15, 20 years out. People don't understand the value of compounding something at 20, 30, 40% a year over a bunch of years. I mean, this is how great fortunes are built. And some people have called me a doomer for saying hyperinflation is in our future. I mean, and obviously hyperinflation will be very painful, and I'm not rooting for that, but and I'm not a doomer. I'm very optimistic on how the world will work and look once we get through this broken money period that we're in. But we do have to get to the other side, and getting from here to the other side is likely to be unpleasant.
As September crash fears grow, Bitcoin and crypto holders are bracing for another leg down. But Raoul and Larry Lepard say this crash is only a temporary pullback, and they remain bullish in the last part of 2025. In a recent post on X, Raoul discusses the many key parts of the crypto ecosystem that are in the waiting room ready to launch. Excluding Bitcoin and Ethereum, he shows that alt season is poised for a breakout, but is taking longer to launch. However, he says that Solana will be next, followed by Sui, Doge, and XRP. And we can see that global M2 and liquidity are key indicators for where prices are headed. With BlackRock being one of the biggest players to get into the space, this will be the least of our concerns, as entire countries are now coming for Bitcoin. While it spent much of the week in the red, Bitcoin's price currently sits just over $109,000, still down from its all-time high last month. They predict that everything in crypto is about to change in September, and discuss why it's more important than ever that nation-states adopt Bitcoin and incorporate into the global economy before the inevitable collapse of the current monetary system as we know it. Let's get right into the latest interview with Larry Lepard, as he gives us his prediction for Bitcoin in the coming months and why a massive surge in capital is about to pour into the space. Drop your comments down below and subscribe if you enjoy the content we do here.
I mean, here you are, you've got a chance to buy this 15 years in for something that could last hundreds, if not 1,000 plus years. I mean, you're not too late. You're really not too late. So my view is, buy what you can, forget about it, and, sit back and enjoy the fact that in Bitcoin terms, you're going to get, in fiat terms, you're going to get richer and richer as Bitcoin becomes more and more of a replacement for fiat, because it's just a much better form of money. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, some people think, well, it's this magic internet money or whatever it is, or it's a bubble, or no, it's none of those things. This is a technical innovation. This is the invention of provable digital scarcity. And so, I love the way, Saylor in some of his recent talks, he's talked about how, inventions happen and then they change the world and they don't, you can't go back. But here we are, they've invented a form of money that solves the biggest problem that every form of money has had for thousands of years. For thousands of years, money has been debased, full stop. There's been no money that hasn't been debased for thousands of years. Even gold. Gold, it grows at 1.7% a year. In 40 years, there'll be twice as much gold on the planet. It gets debased. Now, that's a lot sounder than fiat, which grows at, in the U.S., 7 or 8% a year since 1971. But monetary debasement has just been a fact of life for thousands of years. Bitcoin just solved that. Totally solved it. Completely, and so I invested in it, right? And, do we know how Bitcoin's going to evolve and how it's going to get used? I mean, no, we don't. But we do know that Bitcoin solves the problem of monetary debasement. And that's been a very big problem in human society for thousands of years. And so we just solved it. So, okay, I'll bet on that. I think, I'm guessing that over time, individual free-thinking humans, just like you and me and all the other people who've adopted Bitcoin, are all going to look at it and going to come to the same conclusion and go, you know what? This solves the problem of monetary debasement. I want some of that. That works. Let's use that. Why would I ever price something in fiat when I know that fiat is just, that it can get diluted? I'm not going to get paid back in real terms. I want to get paid back in Bitcoin terms. So, So yeah, it's hard for people, I think, to get their heads around that. But I think once you do, there's really no going back, and and I think, your generation is going to look back and think, I often joke about it. I mean, you can say, so the price of capital is the most, so capitalism is based on increased efficiency and increased productivity, right? That's what Adam Smith taught us. Supply and demand. The baker, makes everyone's life better because he bakes bread and he pays the guy who grew the wheat, and the guy who buys from him pays him, and so on and so forth. And so productivity, specialization and productivity, efficiency is what has brought all the wealth that we have in the world to the world. It's efficiency, okay? And so, the price of money, so efficiency is achieved by investing in the proper things to create productivity. Basically, if you're looking for efficiency in money, if you're looking, so to get efficiency, you've got to invest in the right things. To invest in the right things, you've got to have the right price of the money. When you set the cost of money at zero through ZERP, that's just a crime, because basically people can go borrow money for nothing. They invest in productive industry, and that's why billionaires are billionaires and the rest of us are paying too much for okay?
Lepard says, the ongoing adoption of Bitcoin by governments, institutions, and media signifies a broader recognition of its value, comparing the initial years to the current widespread interest and investment, with a giant spotlight on Bitcoin ETFs. He also suggests that BlackRock, under the guidance of Larry Fink, is currently driving the price. This move, he contends, will underscore Bitcoin's enduring relevance as an asset and its potential as a hedge against currency devaluation.
It's encouraging that we're making a lot of progress, and I'm not a big fan of all the other cryptocurrencies, but I do like the fact that the people in those cryptocurrencies are making a lot of noise the way we are. And isn't it interesting that, we were able to get Trump to kind of endorse the notion of being, pro-Bitcoin, recognizing there was a voting block there. And, we're obviously getting to the point where enough people are in this stuff that, it's a political block now. And politicians, there's one thing for sure, they want, and that's votes. And, if we've got a lot of votes and a lot of people make a lot of noise, it could have an impact. You grow something north of 10% and you compound it year after year after year, you get big, you get really big. That kind of growth is just, that's evidence that something's working. And you're seeing the same thing going on in Bitcoin, by the way, right? There's just enormous, adoption and growth and increased users, and ETFs are bringing all that. Let me tell you about a couple that I missed, all right? So Amazon comes along and Google comes along. And when I started my own fund, the first thing I did was, okay, I'm going to start looking for growth at a reasonable price. And I found it in India. We were doing cell phone providers that were growing 40% a year and trading at 3 times earnings. So that worked. Okay. But I was looking in the US as well, and I saw that Amazon was growing. So when I saw Bitcoin and I realized what it was a network of money, and it was growing, steadily and exponentially, and that everyone needs money, and that it is, truly the best form of sound money. As Saylor and Preston have said recently, there's no deflection in it. There's just 21 million of them, and that's it. It's just, to me, it's such an obvious, clear bet. And, you said price predictions. I have no idea where it's going tomorrow, or I don't know where it's going to be at the end of the year, although I'm guessing maybe 100K or something. But, I'm absolutely certain this is going to be 200K, and then someday it's going to be 1 million, someday it's going to be 2 million, someday it's going to be 8 million per coin. I'm talking that. Because that's just the natural progression of, the growth of a network. And so, that's why I'm pounding the table. Just to, and people getting into it, they think, well, I'm paying too much. I have a friend who's very, very wealthy, and, he knows my average cost is quite low, and, you just can't bear to pay 60 or 70 grand. I said, look, you it doesn't matter. I paid, I don't know, whatever I paid, in the thousands for probably as an average. But, Max Kaiser was paying $2, and I don't regret Max. I just recognize that, someday my average cost is going to seem incredibly cheap to somebody who's paying $2 million a coin. So it's just, it's Saylor's point. It's going up forever, Laura. And so, you can either decide, you're going to buy it eventually. People don't realize that. Everybody's going to buy this eventually. I don't think anyone realizes, or I don't think a lot of people realize that. So you might as well buy it now. versus waiting and having to pay a lot more for it in the future. Compare that to Bitcoin today, and compare that to the markets today. It's, as I said, the answer is somewhat nuanced because I don't think it applies quite as directly to Bitcoin, because you don't have a ton of Bitcoin public companies, and you don't have, the crazy price appreciation. Well, you do have some pretty serious price appreciation, but you don't have, the nutty price appreciation recently that you had at the tail end of the experience with the dot-com companies. Where it does apply to today is in a stock like NVIDIA. Okay, I mean, I see, we're in a bubble driven by low cost money, and everyone post 2008, and I just tweeted about this. It's in the marketplace has basically, in the stock market, has basically learned to buy the dip. And I'm here to tell you that bear markets do exist, and I define a bear market as something more than a 20% correction. I mean, recall that coming out of the 2000 bubble burst, the S&P went down 50%, the NASDAQ went down 80%.
He suggests transitioning to a Bitcoin standard as the world grapples with the impending crisis. He asserts that the promises made by the central banks have been hollow, leading to excessive money printing and a proliferation of poor investments. And with the aftermath of the recent inflation surge, this will not lead to a return to the status quo. He says we can expect Bitcoin to hit 250,000 this year, and then on to 1 million. But he's not the only one that shares this sentiment. Michael Saylor, Max Kaiser, and Cathie Wood all predict Bitcoin's price to hit 7 figures within the next 5 years, as its price has historically multiplied times 10 every 4 years. We're now in the part of the cycle where global liquidity, measured by the M2 money supply, is starting to turn higher. Historically, every major Bitcoin rally has followed this same pattern, with prices accelerating a few months after M2 begins rising. Raoul says that correlation isn't coincidence. Liquidity is the single biggest driver of crypto markets. As M2 expands, capital flows down the risk curve, first into Bitcoin, then into Ethereum, and eventually across the entire altcoin space. We'll be keeping an eye on Bitcoin's price in the coming months. What do you think about Larry Lepard's price prediction for Bitcoin and where crypto is headed in the last part of the year? Comment down below. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. This is Library of Wealth. We'll see you in the next video.